All right, let's get right into today's explainer and demystify the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. This is a law that impacts literally all of our everyday lives, whether you realize it or not. I mean, if you've ever used a curb cutout on a sidewalk, relied on closed captioning, or just walked up a ramp to get into a local coffee shop, you've interacted with the results of the ADA. So today, we're going to break down this fairly complex legislation into a simple, easy-to-understand guide.
It's absolutely crucial to frame the ADA right from the start. We can't just think of it as a dry set of building codes or abstract regulations. No, it's a landmark civil rights law. Its fundamental goal is protecting equal opportunity. It guarantees that people with disabilities have the exact same opportunities as everyone else, whether that's getting a job, purchasing goods, or just participating in state and local government programs.
Think back to 1990. That is the pivotal year President George H.W. Bush signed the ADA into law, and it really did change the American landscape forever. Because before 1990, people with disabilities faced just staggering barriers to employment, to transportation, and to public life in general, without a whole lot of legal recourse.
If we look back at the history, you start to realize how the ADA filled some massive gaps left by previous legislation. For instance, the 1964 Civil Rights Act did incredible things to make it illegal to discriminate based on race, religion, and gender, but it completely excluded disability protections. It took until 1990 for the ADA to pass, with business compliance finally kicking in around 1992, and the law is still evolving. The 2009 Amendments Act actually broadened the definition of disability to make sure even more people are protected today.
So, to keep us from getting bogged down in legal jargon, here's our blueprint for today's explainer. We're going to cover what the ADA is, how it defines a disability, exactly where the law applies, what the everyday rules and accommodations look like, and finally, how you can actually take action. Let's kick things off with Part 1, establishing exactly what the ADA is as a civil rights landmark.
Moving right along to Part 2, we need to define a disability and figure out exactly who is protected here.
Legally speaking, the ADA has a surprisingly nuanced, three-pronged definition of a disability. First up, it has to be an impairment that limits a major life activity. We're talking about walking, seeing, breathing, or even things like concentrating and working. But Parts 2 and 3 are where it gets really interesting. The ADA also protects you based on your medical history, like if you have a record of cancer that's now in remission. And third, you're protected if you are simply regarded as having an impairment. So say someone discriminates against you because of a severe facial scar. Even if that scar doesn't limit your physical abilities at all, you are still protected. Now, this sets up some pretty strict boundaries. You're covered for serious physical or mental impairments, for sure. Even if you use mitigating measures like insulin for diabetes, you're covered. But the law draws a hard line at minor everyday stuff. Just needing standard reading glasses or dealing with a mild pollen allergy, that doesn't count. And it's worth noting the law also specifically excludes certain behavioral conditions, things like pyromania or kleptomania, to make sure these civil rights protections aren't abused.
All right, let's jump into Part 3, where the law actually applies across its 5 main titles.
Breaking the law down into its 5 main sections, or titles, shows you just how much of our public life the ADA touches. Title 1 makes sure you can't be discriminated against when applying for a job at any company with 15 or more employees. Title 2 handles state and local government stuff, so that's public schools, city buses, voting. Title 3 is the big one. It covers public accommodations, which is basically any private business open to the public. Title 4 ensures deaf and hard of hearing individuals can use telecommunications. And Title 5, that's your safety net. It protects you from retaliation if you ever need to file a complaint.
And like I mentioned, Title 3 is arguably the one you interact with the most. It directly impacts the private businesses we visit every single day. Whether we're talking about the local diner down the street, your corner pharmacy, or a massive sports stadium, if it provides goods or services to the public, it has to be accessible. No exceptions. So, how does all this abstract legal text bridge the gap to the real world? Let's get into Part 4, everyday rules and accommodations.
We hear the phrase reasonable accommodation thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean in practice? Well, it absolutely doesn't mean changing the whole fundamental nature of a business. And it doesn't mean a company has to hire someone who isn't qualified. It simply means making fair, practical adjustments. That could be as simple as raising a desk for a wheelchair user, providing a sign language interpreter for a job interview, or maybe giving a student a little extra time on a test.
There's also a stark contrast in how the law treats older buildings versus new ones. The ADA is pretty practical. It recognizes that smaller mom-and-pop businesses can't always shell out for massive structural renovations, so the rules for buildings constructed before early 1993 are a bit more flexible. If an old building can't widen its doors without a massive engineering overhaul, they just have to make changes that are readily achievable without going bankrupt. But if you're building a brand new store today, that's a different story. It absolutely must meet the strict 2010 ADA design standards right out of the gate.
Then there's the topic of service animals, and the ADA is super specific here. These are highly trained working animals, not pets. And get this, under the ADA, the only recognized service animals are dogs and, in certain very specific cases, miniature horses, seriously. And they must be individually trained to do specific tasks, like sensing a seizure, pulling a wheelchair, or guiding someone who is blind. This is a massive distinction because it completely dispels the whole myth versus fact of animals in public spaces. Under the ADA, you literally can't just bring an emotional support parrot or a comfort cat into a restaurant. Emotional support animals provide comfort just by being there, sure, but because they lacked specific task training, they are simply not covered by the ADA's public accommodation rules. Only specifically trained service dogs and miniature horses get that guaranteed public access.
But what about our modern era? When the ADA passed back in 1990, the internet as we know it didn't even exist. But the Department of Justice has made it crystal clear. The ADA still applies. Businesses and governments have to make their websites and mobile apps accessible. If a blind user screen reader can't navigate a hospital's appointment portal, or if a deaf user can't access captions on a city council video, they are being denied equal access. The digital doors have to be kept just as open as the physical ones.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, exactly how to take action and defend your rights.
Look, if you ever face discrimination, you have clear, actionable steps you can take. First, you need to pinpoint who is responsible. Is it your employer, a local business, or maybe the city government? Second, you can easily file a complaint directly online. If it's a workplace issue, you file that with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. But if it's a local business or a government issue, you file that right on the Department of Justice's website, ada.gov.
Now, a lot of people assume filing a complaint means gearing up for this massive, exhausting court battle. But actually, instead of a long lawsuit, your complaint might just be sent to the ADA mediation program. This is a fantastic alternative. It puts you, the business owner, and an impartial mediator in a room to just talk it out. It's totally confidential, voluntary, and designed to find a mutual agreement quickly and fairly, saving everyone a ton of time and money.
We do need to set some realistic expectations, though. The Department of Justice handles complaints from literally all over the country, so you should plan on waiting up to 3 months to hear back on the status of your filing. But, and this is important, even if they don't launch a formal, full-blown investigation, your complaint still provides incredibly valuable data that helps the government track widespread accessibility issues.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. We've seen how the ADA completely reshaped the physical infrastructure of our world over the last 3 decades. But as our daily lives move more and more online for work, healthcare, and education, are we really doing enough to make our digital world just as accessible today? It's really up to all of us, designers, business owners, and everyday citizens, to ensure those digital doors remain wide open for everyone. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I hope you look at the world just a little bit differently today.